The Soldier's Story channel would like to introduce to you the war novel, Under the Southwest Sky, by author Vuong Chu. The novel tells the story of a volunteer soldier in the Vietnam People's Army who participated in the war to overthrow the Khmer Rouge regime, helping the Cambodian people escape genocide. Chapter 1. The First Days of a Rookie.
I was born and raised during the war in a rural area of north-central Vietnam. My parents wanted me to be healthy and ready to volunteer when the fatherland needed me, so they named me Dung, which means brave. In 1975, after the U.S. military withdrew from Vietnam and the Republic of Vietnam government surrendered, people thought that the whole country would have a peaceful life, but no, at this time, the Khmer Rouge began to take power in Cambodia. The Khmer Rouge government pursued extreme nationalism, carrying out a genocidal regime that killed nearly 2 million Cambodians. Not stopping there, they also provoked neighboring countries Thailand and Vietnam. Backed by China, the Khmer Rouge, also known as Pol Pot's army, continuously attacked the southwestern border of Vietnam, massacred civilians and destroyed economic and military facilities along the border. From mid-1977 to mid-1978, the Khmer Rouge simultaneously opened fire and attacked the entire border area, then flooded into Vietnam, blocked roads, forced civilians into schools and pagodas. They then brutally massacred thousands of people by shooting, beheading or beating them with sticks. That year, I was only 18 years old when I received the call to join the army. Although my education level was not high, I was 1m75 tall, weighed nearly 70 kilograms, and was fully qualified to join the army. I joined the army with 10 friends from the commune. At that time, there were many shortages, and there were no trucks, so we had to walk to the new recruit training unit. On the way, everyone was excited, thinking that the military barracks must be very magnificent, with solid houses. But unexpectedly, when we arrived, because the unit was newly established, there were only temporary tents, not like a barracks at all. We trained for 3 months in very bad conditions, eating only white rice twice a week, and the rest of the time we had to eat buckwheat, so we were always hungry. Outside of training, we took turns going into the forest to chop wood and bamboo to build houses. After 3 months, we had built a rather impressive unit, with a row of wooden houses covered with palm leaves. During the training of new recruits, sometimes the soldiers' families from the countryside came up to bring food, including sticky rice, chicken and fruit, all of which were precious things at that time. We shared the food. After 3 months of training, we were given a week's leave. I returned to my unit 3 days before I was ordered to march south. I really had no idea what was waiting for me. We marched to the National Highway, where a convoy of army trucks was waiting. We, the new recruits, were assigned to different units. 10 of us were from the same village, but only one friend, Kien, was in the same unit as me. Kien was a bit short, about 1.6 m tall, but had a muscular body and a calm temperament. We boarded the vans, each carrying a platoon of about 15 to 20 men. After about 200 kilometers, the convoy stopped to cook, eat and drink, then continued on its journey. On the way to the south, people stood on both sides of the road waving happily. We were extremely excited on the van, our hearts filled with pride. Indeed, at the age of 18, we were still very naive. Although we were born and raised in wartime, hearing the sound of bombs and bullets, the roar of planes in the sky, we had never witnessed with our own eyes the cruelty and ferocity of war, where life and death were so close. We arrived in Da Nang, rested for a day, then continued our journey by motor vehicle to Long Bin Depot, Bien Hoa. We rested for 2 days there, then continued our journey southwest, crossed the Chao Doc River, and arrived at Hong Ngu, Dong Thap. When we arrived at the assembly point at the edge of the forest, the sky was turning yellow on the horizon. Each man was given an old AK, a bag of ammunition, and a bag of claymore mines, the type of mine used by the Americans in Vietnam, with 3 magazines. At night, we slept in the temporary house of the unit. The next morning we were assigned to guard the tunnel. Kien, I and another friend were assigned to a group of 3 to guard the barracks. We talked, got to know each other and found out that the friend's name was Trung, a northerner, a little taller than Kien, with a well-proportioned body and a very gentle face. Looking out from the shelter, I was surprised to see a landscape completely different from my homeland. I saw only a few burned houses, lying in the middle of wild sedge fields, under the shade of tall coconut and palm trees. I later learned that they were Borassus flabellifers. Many of the coconut and palm trees had been broken in half by artillery shells, fallen and burned. Before me lay a vast, desolate land, with vast fields of water and sedge growing wildly, only the edges of the fields looked like small lines on a page. Our shelter was dug quite deep underground, surrounded by rice fields, so water seeped in. We had to put up planks to sit on to keep from getting wet. At night, we lay there, and far away on the western horizon, we heard the sound of guns, then the sound of fish jumping, the sound of rats scurrying, which made us all feel uneasy, mixed with a little fear. We heard that our army was fighting the Khmer Rouge near the border. Occasionally there was the sound of artillery shells, fired from our side and also fired back by the enemy. Some of the explosions were very close, which scared many of us. However, that did not stop the curiosity of youth. The artillery was fired at night, and we could clearly see the shells flying like fireballs in the sky. My comrades and I gathered on the roof of the bunker to watch. Platoon leader Vuong, a true warrior, saw us, the new recruits, climbing on the roof of the bunker, shouted loudly, "Do you want to die?" ordered us to sit down in the bunker. We all crawled into the bunker, looked through the bunker door at the sky, where the stars were sparkling behind the artillery shells. My mind began to wander, newly trained and clumsy, unsure of how to fight in the face of the enemy. It was a strange feeling, not the fear of death, but perhaps the excitement of anticipation. Perhaps my two comrades were like me, whispering to each other about what awaited us, vague and vast as the wilderness before the tunnel. We stayed there, and every morning the cook brought us hot rice balls and rotten dried fish. In the midst of famine, such a meal was already delicious. We just sat there, listening to the gunshots, not witnessing them with our own eyes, only occasionally seeing militia and youth volunteers carrying wounded and dead soldiers back to base in hammocks. A week later, we were ordered to move to an old American base in Dam Lac, Sa December. Here, we were trained in combat tactics. I was stronger than my teammates, so I was given an RPD with a 100-round magazine, a light machine gun made in the Soviet Union. The other brothers were given AK, B-40, B-41 guns. After training, we returned to the Hong Ngo border area. My company was stationed in Thuong Doi town, in the houses of the people. The people in the town had partially evacuated, but the remaining families still lived normally. The people here loved the soldiers very much and often brought us food and drinks. The people also said that the Khmer Rouge were very brutal and often sniped, reminding us to be careful. We were stationed there, the relationship between the soldiers and the people was very warm, everything gradually became familiar like at home. Just wandering around the military area was boring, but there were a lot of shrimp and fish around here, especially banana fish weighing more than 2 kilos, even shrimp as big as a big toe. One afternoon, I boldly asked Captain Vuong to let me go fishing to improve my meal. Unexpectedly, Vuong agreed immediately, and also told me to go find vegetables. I immediately brought an AK and a bag of ammunition. When I went, I only wore shorts, a t-shirt and a pith helmet to keep cool, because the surrounding area was vast and flooded. The sun was about to set, the sunlight was shining obliquely, the water surface reflected a golden light. I waited for a while, caught a few shrimps and fishes. I used a rope to tie them up, tying them neatly around my waist. After a while, the sun had set behind the mountain but the sky was still bright. I discovered a fairly large piece of land in the middle of the field. On the land were a few young coconut trees and a papaya tree growing in the middle of the land. On the papaya tree were 2 ripe yellow fruits that looked very delicious. I decided to try to pick the papayas, but getting to the mound was not easy. I had to cross a low, swampy area about 50 meters wide, covered with grass as high as my face. I waded across, using my feet and the barrel of my rifle to clear the grass to make a path. After waiting for a while, when I was about 10 meters from the shore, I discovered an AR-15, American rifle, under a papaya tree, next to a green cloth cap, the type of cap that Pol Pot soldiers often wore. I immediately bent down, the water was up to my chest, hiding under the reeds, and observed very carefully but saw no one. My heart was pounding, I was very nervous. To be safe I decided to sit still and observe every movement. I sat there for about 10 minutes when suddenly from the other side of the field, a Pol Pot soldier appeared with a backpack on his back. I didn't know where he was going, but he was careless and forgot his gun under the papaya tree. He walked towards the papaya tree where the AR-15 was. I slowly regained my composure, gripped the AK tightly in my hand, turned the safety on and switched to automatic fire. If necessary, within 20 meters, I could fire a burst of bullets to stop him from escaping. I continued to sit still and observe. The man walked to the papaya tree, put his bag on the ground, and climbed up to pick 2 ripe papayas. While he was climbing the tree, I gently approached him, touching the edge of the mound, about 10 meters away from the papaya tree, without him knowing. He did not throw the papayas down to the base of the tree, but instead held the 2 papayas in one hand, and with the other hand tightly hugged the tree trunk, slowly sliding down. As soon as I saw the Pol Pot soldier standing on the ground, I stood up and shouted, "Put your hands up." He was startled, stood still for a moment, then slowly dropped the 2 papayas to the ground. I shouted again, "Put your hands up." I don't know if he understood what I said, but he still stood still, not daring to move, his eyes staring at me. He was taller than me, with curly hair, thick eyebrows, white teeth, and dark skin. He looked very strong and fierce. It was the first time I saw a Cambodian. I didn't speak Cambodian either, so I motioned for him to move to a position about 3 meters from the papaya tree, then cautiously approached, pulled out my AR-15 rifle and slung it over my shoulder. I slowly overpowered him and made him go first so I could escort him back to his unit. I took the AR-15 rifle, a pair of rubber sandals, a cloth hat and a bag of food as trophies. Afterwards, the Pol Pot soldier was brought to my superiors to report information. They said he was a scout, scouting our position, determining coordinates for artillery fire. That afternoon, he went out to look for food and unfortunately I caught him. Luckily, I discovered him first so I could take the initiative. He was also very lucky not to discover me. If he had discovered me, I would have had to shoot and he would have certainly lost his life. That was my first achievement after joining the army. I was praised by the company commander and battalion commander. Everyone in the unit looked at me with admiration, which made me feel very proud. I didn't know if the front line was fighting fiercely or not, I only heard gunshots in the distance. My station was still more than 10 kilometers from the border, but it was quite quiet, people were still going about their normal activities. In the afternoon, our army was allowed to go to the riverbank to play. The riverbank was still bustling with people. People sat and chatted that our army was very good, capturing the scout Pol Pot alive. It turned out that the news of my capture of Pol Pot had spread throughout the town. Seeing the villagers whispering, I also approached to start a conversation, humbly recounting the whole story, emphasizing that I was lucky to be doing this, and that it was no big deal. While I was happily chatting with the villagers, a woman about 30 years old came over, her voice gentle, "Hello, soldier." She introduced herself, then invited me into her house, because her mother needed my help. Her house was right on the riverbank, about 30 meters from where I was sitting. I stood up and followed her. Her mother was quite old, about 60 years old. I went into the house, her mother just gave me some water, but before I could say anything, she burst into tears, crying loudly. I was confused and didn't know what to do, so I turned to her. She said that her nephew, who called her mother grandmother, had gone to harvest rice there a few months ago, near the border, and had not returned. To this day, he is still missing, possibly captured or killed by Pol Pot's troops. Seeing the soldiers enter the house, the people around were also curious, gathered around to listen. Everyone stood outside and talked excitedly. My sister and I went outside and saw an old man telling us that there were 2 Pol Pot soldiers on a motorboat, the very boat they had robbed from the people. Every afternoon when our people came home from work, they would cross the river to shoot and kill. Hearing the story, I was extremely angry. My youth was impulsive, my anger flared up. I secretly blamed my soldiers for not stopping them, allowing them to act like that. That evening, I went to see Captain Vuong, told him about that afternoon and asked, "Please let me go ambush and kill those 2 Pol Pot soldiers because I was so angry, I couldn't stand it anymore." He immediately scolded me with a stern face. "Undisciplined soldiers, do whatever you want." He explained that shooting and killing was no joke, fighting needed to be organized and planned carefully, then calmly continued. "Killing them was fine, but if they killed you, how would I explain to the battalion and your family?" I returned, but that night I couldn't sleep because I thought about the people they shot dead every day. Seeing that I couldn't sleep, Comrade Trung curiously asked why, so I told him about that afternoon. Trung looked gentle but was actually very aggressive. Listening to me, he was also very angry, so he suggested that the next morning we both go ask Vuong for permission. The next morning, we went to visit Vuong together. At first, he was adamant that we should not go, but Trung and I kept on pleading. Finally, he reluctantly agreed to let us go. We eagerly went back to get ready. Early in the afternoon, the 2 of us set off. I took the RPD, Trung took the AK, a bag of ammunition and a shovel. We went to the riverbank, to the woman's house from yesterday, informed her that the unit had agreed to let us go avenge our compatriots, then asked to borrow a small boat. She quickly borrowed a boat from a neighbor and took us on our way. During our training, we learned to swim and row, so using the pole to steer the boat in the direction the villagers pointed was not difficult. Trung and I took turns holding the pole and keeping watch. Along the way, I memorized the landmarks so that when we returned, we would not stray into enemy territory. After about an hour of paddling along the river, we came to what the locals described as a vast water field covered with reeds, occasional palm trees and mounds of earth. We picked a high mound, probably a termite mound, and pulled the boat up onto it. We climbed up the mound and dug a hole with a shovel. The ground was soft, and we dug deep enough to sit down and hide. Then we carefully covered the mound with reeds to camouflage it, making it difficult to spot from more than 5 meters away. Sitting in the bunker for a long time without seeing any movement, I discussed with Comrade Trung about moving the boat to a visible place to lure Pol Pot's troops. Trung immediately agreed and together we pushed the boat to a position about 20 meters away from the bunker. Trung dived into the water to anchor the boat to prevent it from drifting. We returned to the bunker, camouflaged ourselves carefully and sat waiting, hoping the enemy would appear. We sat there for about 2 hours, the sun was about to set but still no movement. Comrade Trung began to get impatient. "They probably won't come today. Let's go home." I still wanted to wait. "Sit here and wait a little longer, if the sun sets and they still haven't come, we'll go home." Trung listened and took out some dry food for the 2 of us to eat. I had just finished half of my dry food when I suddenly heard the sound of a motorboat in the distance. I tapped Trung on the shoulder and said, "They must be here." Trung nodded. As expected, about 10 minutes later, a motorboat appeared in front of us, gliding very fast on the water, about 200 meters away from us. On the boat were 2 Pol Pot men dressed in black, with scarves around their necks. One sat in the back steering the boat, the other sat in the front holding a machine gun. The machine gun was a belt-fed machine gun, firing continuously at a rate of more than 500 rounds a minute. The motorboat quickly passed our hiding place, perhaps they did not notice our boat anchored as bait. We both looked at each other with a slightly disappointed expression, perhaps we would have to wait for another opportunity. Fortunately, not long after the motorboat turned around, at a closer distance, they spotted our boat. But they were very cautious, not approaching immediately, just circling back and forth, keeping their distance and observing. The guy in the front aimed his machine gun at the boat, ready to fire. I thought to myself that if I missed or was spotted by the enemy, it would be difficult to survive against that machine gun. Perhaps Comrade Trung thought the same as me, because he whispered, "Lie still here, wait for the opportunity to shoot." I nodded in agreement. The motorboat circled around for a while, found nothing suspicious, then slowed down and slowly approached our boat. The boat driver was very alert. When he got close to our boat, he did not turn off the engine. If anything happened, he would speed up and run away. The person sitting in the front was more subjective, put the machine gun under the boat, then stood up and looked at our decoy boat. At this time, the motorboat was about 30 meters from the bunker where we were hiding. Luckily, they were facing the sun, and the afternoon sun was slanting, making it difficult to see. They were forced to slowly approach our moorings. Meanwhile, we were well camouflaged in the bunker, so they did not notice us. The man in front reached out and grabbed the edge of our boat and pulled it closer to theirs. Seeing nothing inside, the boatman behind stood up and looked around for the owner of this strange boat. This was our chance. They were suddenly surprised. The guy in front had no gun in his hand, the driver behind just stood there watching. I immediately winked at Comrade Trung, told him to use the AK to shoot the guy behind. I used the RPD to shoot the guy in front. We fired together. I fired 5 shots at the same time, hitting the guy sitting near the machine gun in front. After the first shot, he fell face down on the boat. The guy behind was shot by Comrade Trung and fell into the water, life or death unknown. I continued to fire about 10 shots, 50 rounds, into the motorboat. Comrade Trung also fired an entire AK magazine. After the gunfire stopped, we clearly saw the man in front lying dead on the boat in a pool of blood. The man behind was nowhere to be seen. We did not know if he was dead or had jumped into the river to hide. Therefore, we had to be always vigilant, not daring to get close, just listening and observing. The two of us looked very carefully but saw no trace of the man behind, so I immediately fired 2 more shots into the motorboat because I was afraid he was still alive and hiding behind the boat, waiting for us to be careless before shooting again. After a while, still seeing nothing, I fired another shot into the bottom of the boat. Comrade Trung said, "He is definitely dead, Dung." After listening for a while without any movement, we left the bunker. The RPD was too long so I left it in the bunker. Comrade Trung took the AK, and we waded out to the 2 boats. When we arrived, we found the man on the boat shot in the stomach and chest, blood everywhere, heart, liver, intestines and lungs scattered. The other man was still missing. We climbed into our boat, which was still intact, unharmed. The motorboat had a few bullet holes but no serious damage, just a little water in, and we were able to tow it back after sealing the bullet holes. We reached the motorboat, threw the body into the river, cleaned the bottom of the boat and searched around, found the other man who had been shot and had fallen into the river, his head buried in the mud, his legs sticking out, dangling near the surface. I grabbed his leg and pulled him up. It turned out he had also been hit by an AK bullet in the stomach, fell face down in the mud, unable to stand up and suffocated. He was wearing a watch on his wrist. I took it off as a trophy and threw his body into the river. Meanwhile, Comrade Trung was struggling to start the boat engine. It was getting dark. We had to tie the 2 boats together and row back quickly, lest we get lost before dark. When we rowed back, 5 army boats and local people came out to welcome us. Seeing us return safely, everyone was very happy and gathered to pull the boat to help us. It turned out that when we opened fire, the local people and my comrades heard it. Everyone gathered on the river bank, waiting for our victorious return. When we reached the shore, the local people gathered around to congratulate us, thank us and brought us a lot of food and fruit. Returning to the unit, Trung and I excitedly reported to Vuong. He praised us but told us not to say anything, lest the battalion or regiment find out and reprimand us. But the whole town knew, so we couldn't hide it. 2 days later, there was an announcement that Trung and I had to go to the battalion to meet Battalion Commander Quan. We set off in a nervous mood, not knowing whether we would be rewarded or disciplined, because our actions were serving the people but violated military discipline. When we met, Mr. Quan invited us to sit down and poured us some water to drink. After drinking, he blamed us for being undisciplined. We both scratched our heads and explained that we were angry when we heard the villagers talking, so we did that. Then, he encouraged us. Although you two are new soldiers, your fighting spirit is very brave and commendable. We talked for a few sentences and then he let us go. Of course, there was no reward or punishment, our merits and sins were equal. About a week later, I was trusted by the brothers and appointed as squad leader. My squad at that time had 10 comrades.